Hi, and welcome to Why Do Countries Exist, an episode on Mexican political parties. So today's episode was requested by Fan Fanatic on YouTube. If you want me to do another country's political parties, please either comment it down below, send me an email, send me a message on Patreon for my patrons, shout out to them and especially Danny Brown by the way, or send me a request through my feedback and request form in the description. I currently have requests to do Iraqi, Lithuanian, Singaporean, Czech, Swedish, Thai, Norwegian, Finnish, Greenlandic, Hungarian, and many more political parties. If you want to understand Mexican political parties, it's probably best to start by examining the party that ran Mexico from 1929 to 2000, the Institutional Revolutionary Party, or Partido Revolucionario Institucional, or PRI, or the PRI. The PRI was formed in the aftermath of the Mexican Revolution, which saw the Mexican conservative elites overthrown and a new reformist government take power. This is a massive simplification of the Mexican Revolution, but important to note that in the decades after the revolution, pretty significant societal and economic change occurred, and in 1929, the revolutionaries formed, first the National Revolutionary Party, then changed the name to the Party of the Mexican Revolution, before deciding on the PRI in 1946. The PRI, over its 71-year reign, did allow some opposition, but this opposition was managed by the state to limit discontent. It was able to dominate Mexican politics due to it having the support of the middle class, organized labor, and the Mexican peasantry. At first, the party was somewhat left-wing and reformist, promoting some land reform, the creation of a welfare state, the nationalization of the oil industry, opposition to the church, and strong government involvement in the economy. However, as the years went by, it became increasingly clear that the PRI didn't really have an ideology, and became more a vehicle for anyone who wanted to serve in government, and became very technocratic and out of touch. The PRI over the years also became increasingly unpopular due to a variety of factors: corruption, crackdowns on any who spoke out against them, a rightward shift in the party, and economic problems. The 80s saw increasing problems for the PRI, with many leftist members leaving the PRI and forming their own political parties. One of the largest of these parties would be the Party of the Democratic Revolution, or PRD. The first really competitive election was the 1988 election, which ended with a PRI victory that most believed was due to electoral fraud. Still, in 1989, the opposition managed to win a governorship election for the first time, and in 2000, the opposition managed to win the presidency, ending the PRI's 71-year dominance. Post-2000, the PRI continues to exist and contest elections, even winning the 2012 presidential election, but it has lost its dominant position in Mexican politics. While it's obvious Mexico wasn't a democracy during the PRI's rule, it's a little difficult to pinpoint exactly where Mexican democracy began. Most of Mexico's elections post-2000 do still have accusations of fraud around them, although which ones are credible and which ones are the opposition being sore losers is up for some debate. Let's start talking about Mexico's political structure. Mexico is a federation with 31 states plus Mexico City, which is its own polity that de facto operates as its own state. Each state has its own governor and state government. Throughout the episode, I'll note how many governorships each party has. Mexico's Congress is divided into two bodies. The lower body is the Chamber of Deputies, made up of 500 deputies who are elected from two ways. 300 are elected via first past the post from 300 electoral districts found throughout the country. The districts are roughly equal in population, although every single state is required to have at least two districts. Deputies elected from the district only require a plurality of the vote in order to get elected. The remaining 200 deputies are elected via proportional representation, elected from 5 different electoral regions, and parties must get at least 2% of the vote in order to pass the electoral threshold. Important to note, no party may have more than 300 seats in the chamber. Deputies will vote on rules and regulations, levy taxes, and verifies election results. The upper body is the Senate, made up of 129 senators who are elected via two ways. First, 96 are elected from the 32 states in Mexico. Whichever party or coalition gets the most votes will elect 2 senators, while whichever party or list gets the second most votes will elect only 1 senator. The remaining 32 are elected at large and will be allocated proportionally to each party's senatorial vote nationwide. The Senate will vote on rules and regulations, approve Supreme Court picks, treaties, and federal intervention in state affairs. The Mexican Congress is similar to the American Congress in the sense that the lower body is supposed to represent the people, while the upper body is supposed to represent the states. However, both bodies are weaker than the president, who holds a large degree of political power. Finally, before we start diving into the first party, I just want to briefly mention political coalitions have played an increasingly important role in Mexican politics, with out of the 6 main parties we will talk about today, all but one of them a part of a political coalition. There is the ruling coalition, Let's Keep Making History coalition, made up of the 3 ruling parties, MORENA, PVEM, and PT. Then there is the opposition coalition, Strength and Heart for Mexico, made up of the 2 largest traditional opposition parties, PAN and the PRI, plus the PRD, which was dissolved after the election for reasons I'll talk about later. These coalitions, for the most part, hold throughout the country, with coalition parties typically working together at the state and local level, although it can vary a bit depending on the state. So with all that out of the way, let's start diving into the parties. First, we have the National Regeneration Movement, or Movimiento de Regeneración Nacional, or MORENA. MORENA is, unlike most of the other parties we will talk about, just a little over a decade old. It was formed around former PRD member and head of Mexico City, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO. AMLO had in both 2006 and 2012 run for president, and both times came fairly close to winning. In 2006, he actually lost by just a little under 250,000 votes, or 0.6% of the vote. This AMLO blamed on electoral fraud. In 2011, he formed MORENA as a civil association, and then transformed it into a political party after losing in 2012. AMLO, while he had been a PRD member, for many years he became increasingly isolated in his own party, which he felt like had abandoned its more principled and leftist positions. In 2018, AMLO ran again under MORENA, running as a candidate that would break from past Mexican governments and bring about real reform, managing to win with 54% of the vote. MORENA, since 2018, has been the largest party in the country. This latest election in June of 2024 saw Claudia Sheinbaum, the former head of Mexico City, elected president. It ideologically broadly leans left, embracing a left-wing populist message. However, the main through line with the party is that it's a party for AMLO and his supporters who want to see major anti-corruption reforms and a strong welfare state. It generally gets the most support among poor Mexicans, indigenous Mexicans, and those living in the South and the coast. The party currently has 253 deputies, 66 senators, and 23 governors are members of the party. It is currently headed by Luisa Maria Alcanda Lujan, the former Minister of the Interior and Minister of Labor and Social Welfare, although AMLO was still seen as the de facto head of the party. MORENA's policies and ideology can probably be best understood by looking at what AMLO did while in office. One of AMLO's most impactful policies has been direct cash transfers, which he set up during his presidency to struggling Mexicans. He also has sought to build up the welfare state, opposed privatization, created more public universities, raised the minimum wage, and built more low-income housing. AMLO has generally tried to not raise taxes to pay for his programs, but instead sought to cut down on the bureaucracy and reduce high-paying officials' pay. Socially, AMLO's presidency did see him promote a more progressive social policy, wanting to fight against homophobia and protecting indigenous rights. However, while in office, he previously worked with the Social Encounter Party, a socially conservative party, and has backed the Tren Maya, an infrastructure project on the Yucatan Peninsula that indigenous environmental activists have opposed. In foreign policy, AMLO has generally favored greater cooperation with other Latin American states, is generally sympathetic towards left-wing governments in Latin America, and while not anti-American, was more critical towards the U.S. and its role in Mexico. AMLO has also pushed for the democratization of the judiciary, wants to break up the media sector, and favors a more dovish and forgiving policy towards the cartels in order to prevent violence. Sheinbaum, in comparison to AMLO, broadly aligns with him on most issues, being hostile towards neoliberalism and favors a strong government. However, she is also seen as more socially progressive, wanting to do more to protect the environment, and is less populist, even being a bit of a wonk when compared to her predecessor. Despite Sheinbaum's win this past June, she, AMLO, and MORENA are not without their critics. AMLO has been accused of being a demagogue, framing all of his opponents to his rule as evil, corrupt elites plotting against him. In both the 2006 and 2012 election, he claimed he lost solely due to electoral fraud. This, along with him defunding the National Election Institute, which runs elections in the country, and democratizing the judiciary, which has historically opposed him, have led his opponents to accuse him of being anti-democratic, wanting to cripple anything that might oppose him. He also is accused of being fiscally irresponsible, soft on the cartels, corrupt or at least allowing corruption to happen, weak on social issues, and ultimately failing to live up to many of the promises AMLO promised when running for office. When talking about policies for the party, you probably noticed I talked almost exclusively about AMLO and what he did or believes. Morena is seemed almost as less of a political party with an ideology, but more as a vehicle to get those loyal to AMLO into office. While Sheinbaum isn't AMLO, you do see a lot of news reports asking if Sheinbaum is actually her own political figure and not just a puppet for AMLO. This raises the question of how Morena will do in a post-AMLO environment, where he decides to fully leave politics and if that will be the death nail for the party. All of this being said, however, Morena is still by far the most popular party in Mexico. June saw Sheinbaum win with a decisive 61% of the vote, a majority of the governorship races up for the election, and 42% of the vote in the legislative race. Mexicans right now are broadly supportive of Morena, and right now it is by far the most powerful party in the country. Finally, most importantly, AMLO has tweeted about elves being real, which makes any criticism against him null and void. The next two parties are loyal allies of Morena and a part of the Let's Keep Making History coalition. First, we have the Ecologist Green Party of Mexico, or Partido Verde Ecologista de Mexico, or PVEM. PVEM is it's complicated. PVEM was formed in the early 90s from Mexican ecologists who formalized and consolidated around PVEM in 1993. It, starting in 2000, began to align with the Conservative National Action Party, or PAN, until in 2006, when it started to align itself with the PRI. During this, PVEM tended to get defined as a green conservative party. However, starting in the 2021 midterms, it began aligning itself with Morena, and now will be an important ally to the Sheinbaum government. It seems to be somewhat moving towards a more traditional, environmentalist message, but still is ultimately a party that mixes environmentalist thought with a pro-status quo, or at least pro-whoever is the most popular politician message. It seemingly gets the most support in rural areas, in San Luis Potosi, and to a lesser extent Chiapas. It currently has 62 deputies, 14 senators, and the governor of San Luis Potosi is a member of the party. It is currently headed by Karen Castrillon Trujillo, a former deputy and current senator from Mexico City. PVEM favors more environmental regulations and socially conservative policies. On its website, it talks about how it wants to get rid of pollution in Mexico's waterways, wants to teach ecology in schools, wants to create a National Ecology Council that serves to advise and monitor the government on environmental matters, wants tougher regulations around illegal logging and animal trafficking, and wants more public notifications on air pollution. The tougher regulations around illegal logging also points to the fact that it tends to be tough on crime, wanting harsher penalties to kidnappers, government officials convicted of a crime, and backs the death penalty. It also supports more electrical rail infrastructure, supports nuclear disarmament, wants to expand Social Security, wants to eliminate land speculation, wants to halt the growth of large cities, and promotes further decentralization. I think the biggest thing you find when looking into PVEM is that it's clearly a chameleon. It has been frequently accused of changing its political allegiance and ideology in order to suit the party in power, which makes it appear spineless and power-hungry. This isn't helped by accusations that it's corrupt and that it's a party for the González-Torres political family, with the first 20 years of the party being headed by members of the family. This, along with the party often working with parties who don't view the environment as a top priority, and being a Green Party that backs socially conservative policies like the death penalty, means it is accused of often getting support from environmentally conscious Mexicans who just don't know the reputation of the party. Admittedly, this can be said about many other Green Parties throughout the world, i.e. being forced to work with stronger, less environmentally friendly or focused parties, or having views that seem out of step with green policies, but it does seem to be more out in the open with PVEM. While PVEM's tactic of changing alliances every couple of years has seen the party grow to a decently sized political force, it won't be able to hold on to this forever if it keeps its reputation as a chameleon. The other party aiding Morena is the Labour Party, or Partido del Trabajo, or PT. PT was formed in the 90s from various leftist and worker movements merging together. It, for the first couple of years, lingered in somewhat obscurity, getting less than 3% of the vote, which also at the same time meant over 500,000 votes. It quickly formed a strategy of linking up with larger left-leaning parties in order to strengthen its position and use its coalition partnerships to win some elections. It for many years was an ally of the PRD until the 2018 election, when it hitched itself to Morena and AMLO. Since that election, it has been a loyal ally to MORENA, working with them in most elections. It today represents leftists, generally those left of AMLO and MORENA, and those who want a more anti-capitalist society in Mexico. It generally gets the most support in the South and in rural areas. It currently has 49 deputies and 6 senators. It is currently headed by Alberto Anaya, a former deputy and senator. Generally, the party is leftist economically, socially progressive, and internationally opposed to the West. It seeks to fight social and economic inequality, supports a strong welfare state, supports doing more to raise peasants and the working class out of poverty, and wants to move away from a neoliberal model and a free market economy. It is opposed to racism, sexism, and homophobia, wants a more direct democracy, wants to do more to protect the environment, is pro-choice, wants the Attorney General to be democratically elected, and wants to fight union bureaucracy. It internationally supports Cuba, wanted closer relations between Mexico and the Caribbean and Central American states, is pro-Palestinian, wants greater ties between Mexico and China, and tends to be critical towards the United States. Probably the easiest criticism you could throw at PT is that since it's the furthest left party in the Mexican Congress, it's likely seen by many right-wingers and centrists as too far left and is a unrealistic party. But maybe more importantly, PT is debatably the weakest party out of all the ones I'm really going to talk about today. Despite this being their best election, getting a little over 5.6% of the vote in the proportional vote, they were outvoted by all the other parties minus the PRD. The only reason it got a large chunk of members into the legislature was because of its alliance with MORENA, and electoral laws surrounding coalitions. It also doesn't have a single governorship, although it has in the past. It just doesn't have the power of other parties. It has to rely almost entirely on it being allied to a larger party like MORENA in order to win seats and remain relevant. This makes it appear like the PVEM, a parasitic party that has to leech onto other parties in order to survive. All this, quite frankly, means that if you are a left-leaning Mexican, while you might be enticed by PT's hardline stance, you'll most likely probably just end up voting for MORENA, who has popular figures like AMLO and Sheinbaum, and is already fairly left-wing. PT probably isn't going to go away anytime soon, but it is unlikely to rise at any point, so long as it remains attached to the hip to whoever the mainstream left-wing head is. So now, let's start looking at the opposition. We'll first start talking about the parties a part of the Strength and Heart for Mexico coalition. The largest party in the coalition is currently the PAN, or Partido Acción Nacional. PAN, compared to the previous parties we have looked at, is much, much older. It was formed in 1939 from several Catholic-influenced politicians who wanted to serve as a counterweight to the PRI. It began contesting elections, although under the PRI's rule, these elections were viewed as heavily tilted towards the PRI, so the PAN always emerged as a minor player with something like 10% of the vote every single time, serving more as controlled opposition that would allow some dissent to manifest. In the 80s, it went through a transformation, becoming more focused on fighting for free and fair elections and becoming more tied to the business community. This saw the party grow as many Mexicans upset with the PRI's decades-long rule voted for them to bring about change. This saw in 2000 PAN's Vicente Fox win the presidency, and then in 2006, PAN's Felipe Calderón winning it once again. PAN's rule would come to a close in 2012 when the PRI returned to power, but they have still remained a very powerful force in Mexican politics. Their support base is seen as a combination of very Catholic Mexicans, the rich, urban professionals, and generally from the north or from the Mexican lowlands in the center of the country. However, last election, its northern support base seemed to somewhat diminish. It defines itself as subscribing to political humanism, which in reality translates to overall being the party for right-leaning, often religious Mexicans, and these days, really anyone hostile towards MORENA, AMLO, and Sheinbaum. It currently has 71 deputies, 22 senators, and the governors of Aguascalientes, Chihuahua, Guanajuato, and Querétaro are members of the party. It is currently headed by Jorge Romero Herrera, a former deputy. PAN is like many conservative parties, socially conservative, and is more supportive of a free market or less government in the economy. Owing to its ties to the Catholic Church, it is strongly pro-life, opposing abortion, euthanasia, and the death penalty, rejects any testing on human embryos, seems to support school choice, wants cops to get a higher salary, wants to do more to fight human trafficking and femicide, and opposes full legalization of drugs, although it does support cannabis being legal for medical uses. Economically, it wants to do more to get people off welfare, viewing it as a more temporary measure, wanting to give more tax incentives to fix social ills, wants to cut down on regulations, supports private property rights, wants to keep the public debt low, and opposes progressive taxes. It also supports elections for the presidency to be under a 2-round voting system, is generally supportive towards greater cooperation with the US, supports free trade, and is opposed to the democratic election of judges. PAN is certainly, like MORENA, a heavyweight in Mexican politics, but it also is certainly weaker. PAN is the only Mexican party that is very explicitly on the right, which means left-leaning Mexicans generally dislike the party. Its ties with the Catholic Church make it seem old-fashioned and regressive, while its ties to the business class make it appear like it's for the rich and uncaring for poor Mexicans. While I think most people would probably define it as simply a conservative party, you do get on the fringes of the party more far-right groups and elements that back and influence it. In the 2000s, the party was dominant, but after 2 administrations that saw PAN repeat many of the mistakes of the corruption, a lack of any real change, and increasing drug violence, Mexicans just got sick of them. They were elected with the promise of being a new voice for Mexico, sick of rule that would bring about actual democracy, but left with many people disillusioned. PAN actually, in the aftermath of losing the 2012 election, grew closer to the PRI, working with them at several points, which hurt their image as an alternative to the status quo even more. They are the second largest party in the country, but considering Sheinbaum won 61%, while the Strength and Heart Mexico's coalition candidate got just 28% of the vote, it's clear that they will have a long way to go before they can really challenge MORENA. PAN's main political ally these days is the PRI. As stated earlier, the PRI didn't disappear when it lost in 2000. It emerged as a large opposition party to the PAN in those years, and then in 2012, due to dissatisfaction with the PAN, managed to win the 2012 presidential election, with PRI's Enrique Peña Nieto getting 39% of the vote. It in recent years has attempted to present itself as a centrist, technocratic party, a party that knows how to get things done, will be pragmatic, and isn't going to bring about any extreme policies. It ran in 2018 with PVEM coming in third behind AMLO and PAN's candidates. After the election, it formed a close alliance with PAN, which it has maintained up until today. It today gets the most support in the north and somewhat in the areas west of Mexico City. It currently has 37 deputies, 14 senators, and the governors of Coahuila and Durango are members of the party. It is currently headed by Alejandra Moreno Cardenas, a senator and former governor of Campeche. PRI has attempted to redefine itself as a center-left social democratic party. It supports more funding for education and healthcare, supports a type of universal basic income, and wants more public and private affordable housing to be built. It also wants less regulations around the registration of political parties, wants the PR seats to be divided up more proportionally, wants more regulation around AI, wants to create a national intelligence service to better combat crime across the country, tends to favor long-term institutions rather than 6-year presidential administrations in carrying out long-term projects, and wants to do more to fight gender inequality. There were some fears that Peña Nieto's rule might see a return to never-ending PRI-rule. These fears were fairly quickly dashed as Mexicans quickly became fed up with the bad job Peña Nieto was doing at running the country. People were hopeful that the 12 years PRI was out of power may have seen them change, but corruption and economic problems continued. The government was accused of manipulating the media in order to prevent criticism, and infamously allowed the Iguala mass kidnapping to take place, which saw over 30 college students taken by the police to never be seen again. PRI likes to paint the image that is now a respectable party, but most people view them as a party that stands for nothing but maintaining their own power. They are first and foremost for the wealthy and powerful political elites and care very little about the rest of Mexican society. This has seen them steadily lose support since 2012. This last election is really remarkable for being the first election since the PRI was founded that they didn't put up a candidate for president, instead endorsing a joint candidate with the PAN. If trends continue, it wouldn't be shocking if PRI disappears in the next couple years, or is forced to merge with PAN in order to stay relevant. So long as the PRI is remembered first and foremost for its unsavory past, it will continue to lose ground. Before we talk about the last major or really significant Mexican party, I thought we should take a second and look at an ally of the PAN and PRI this last election, the PRD. The PRD, as stated before, was formed in the 80s as a leftist breakoff of the PRI, unhappy with the lack of internal democracy within the party, and merged with some smaller, left-leaning movements. It quickly became a prominent player in the country, with AMLO becoming the head of Mexico City in the late 90s and running competitive presidential campaigns in 2006 and 2012. It was seen as a solid center-left rival to the PRI and PAN, opposing neoliberalism while being socially liberal and supporting more welfare spending. It got the most support among students, indigenous Mexicans, and was powerful in Mexico City and the South, particularly in Michoacan and Tabasco. However, tension was high in the party, as AMLO's wing wanted a more principled and aggressively left-wing party, while a rival wing supported a more pragmatic approach, working with the PRI and PAN in getting its policies passed. After AMLO formed MORENA, the more principled wing left, leaving the pragmatic wing, which quickly became close with PAN. It worked with PAN in both the 2018 and 2024 election, but it suffered brutal results. Most of its old-time supporters abandoned ship, as they felt MORENA was a more authentic left-wing voice, and the new rump PRD had sold out, and in 2024, it managed to win only 1 deputy and 2 senators. This result was so bad, the party was actually dissolved by the National Election Institute, since it failed to pass the 3% threshold required for a party to maintain national status. The party isn't entirely dead. It does still have local and state branches that will continue to operate in some states, serving as key allies to the PAN and PRI, but the party at the national level is dead. So with that out of the way, let's look at the last opposition party in the Congress, the Citizens Movement, or Movimiento Ciudadano, or MC. The MC was founded in 1999 from a pre-breakoff, similar to the PRD. However, the MC was a more liberal breakoff, wanting to cut down on regulations while still supporting a social market economy and wanting to see more democratic reforms in the country. It historically worked with the PRD, backing the PRD's candidates from 2000 to 2012, and then in 2018 working with the PAN and PRD. Throughout the 2010s, the party began to see a change and grow. It, as a reaction to the drug war, became more socially liberal and slowly began distancing itself from other parties. This saw, in 2024, it contest the presidential election by itself. While MC came a third, well behind the other coalitions, it still was the best result ever for the party, getting over 10% of the vote for the first time ever. The party is a social democratic / socially liberal party, representing those in Mexico who disagree with the populism of MORENA and the historic corruption of the PRI and PAN, and I guess could be somewhat considered the centrist option in Mexican politics. It got the most support last election broadly in the north-central-ish region, with a lot of support concentrated in the states of Jalisco and Nuevo León. It currently has 27 deputies, 5 senators, and the governors of Jalisco and Nuevo León are members of the party. It is currently headed by Jorge Maynez, a former deputy and the party's presidential candidate in the 2024 election. MC is broadly progressive. It supports drug legalization, the demilitarization of the police and army, is pro-choice, opposes discrimination of sexual and racial minorities, wants more autonomy for indigenous communities, backs maternity leave, wants a more open government, and supports a move towards a more participatory democracy. It does support a welfare state, progressive taxes, universal basic income, and more environmental regulations, but also supports some privatization in the healthcare sector, wants more fiscal responsibility, and wants more foreign investment in the country. It also supports a professional civil service and judiciary, supports increased Mexican cooperation with the United States and Caribbean in fighting drug cartels and promoting peace, and wants more funding to go towards the arts and sports. MC has seen a lot of growth in recent years, but it's still a pretty small party compared to most of the others we've been talking about. While admittedly, MORENA's allies of PVEM and PT are also pretty small, they are carried by MORENA and can collectively pull their resources together to get a bigger share in the legislature than they would have otherwise if they had gone alone. MC's result was a historic high, but that historic high saw them win just around 5% of the legislature. They would have more influence if Sheinbaum's victory this past election wasn't so decisive, as they could have played kingmaker, but this didn't happen, so they are very much on the sidelines. I'd imagine more left-wing Mexicans may view them as almost spoilers since there's a lot of overlap with their progressive messaging, and they might just be seen as spineless or unwilling to go far enough in bringing about economic change. Right-wingers may in turn view them as another left-leaning party that is full of empty promises, and because MC isn't working with the PAN and PRI, could be seen as a spoiler for opposition candidates. MC is an important party in Mexican politics, but it seems really unlikely it's going to take off and take over anytime soon. So those are all the parties in the Mexican Congress, but I thought I'd take a second and touch up on some of the other smaller state parties. Maybe the largest of these state parties is the PRD, which we have already talked about. The second largest is probably the New Alliance, a liberal party that was formed in 2005 from the National Educational Workers Union, a teachers' union historically friendly with the PRI. It was a pretty small party on the national scene until 2018, when it contested the election with the PRI and PVEM, and then lost its national registration, but continued having a presence in several states and has recently begun aligning more with MORENA. Next, we have the Solidarity and Encounter Party. Originally, the party was formed as the Social Encounter Party in 2006, as a socially conservative party tied to Pentecostal churches found throughout Mexico. They contested their first national election in 2015, and in 2018 contested elections as a part of AMLO's coalition. But they failed to get 3% of the vote, so they lost their national registration. They then rebranded as a Solidarity and Encounter Party and re-registered, but they lost their registration in the 2021 midterms, and it remains a small local party in several states. Two other small parties that lost their registration in 2021 were the Force for Mexico and Progressive Social Networks, two parties broadly representing center-left progressive, somewhat skeptical towards AMLO Mexicans. They both failed to get 3% of the vote and now remain as small local parties. Finally, there's 9 parties with a presence in a state's legislature that are regionalist outfits, typically along the Pacific coast, and typically center-left-ish. All these parties aren't super important in understanding Mexican politics, but they can be important in state politics. Finally, there's several obscure small parties that aren't officially registered, but do still operate. First off, we have several far-left groups, mostly communist, like the Communist Party of Mexico, the Communist Party of Mexico, Marxist-Leninist, and the Communist Party. Maybe the most notable far-left groups would be the Popular Revolutionary Army, a Maoist group that has waged a very limited guerrilla war in southern Mexico, and the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, or EZLN, a very famous group which promotes a type of indigenous-led, anarchistic, left-libertarian ideology that for several decades actually out and out controlled large parts of Chiapas until 2023 when they dissolved back into the Mexican state. On the other side of the political spectrum, you have far-right groups, like the Nationalist Front for Mexico, which actually calls for Mexico to take all of Central America, El Yunque, a secret fascist society, and the National Synarchist Union, a group originally founded in the 30s that was very pro-Axis during World War II, but largely died out in the 20th century. Finally, you have several small regionalist outfits that aren't big enough to make it into the state legislatures. So those are the political parties of Mexico. In conclusion, you have the party of Sheinbaum Morena, which represents broadly left-wing populists and just general center-left thought, and her smaller allies of the PVEM, a on-paper environmentalist party that is loyal to power, and PT, which is a socialist party. Her opponents are the PAN, a right-wing conservative force, PAN's ally, the PRI, which historically controlled the country, and then the smaller MC, which is a socially liberal, center-left/centrist group. Mexican parties are these days really based around if they like or dislike AMLO, Sheinbaum, and Morena, with the left broadly liking them while the right don't. I think one really fascinating thing about Mexican politics right now is, in comparison to many other Latin American states, you have one party that really shines through, whereas in most other Latin American states, you will typically see one ruling party that is the head of a kind of sprawling coalition in the legislature, but isn't in as strong of a position as Morena is in. They have to work a little bit more with the other parties in the legislature. Morena does have to do this to a certain extent with its allies, but it's so large in the Congress it can kind of pass stuff by itself. That's not to say it has no checks or it can do whatever it wants, but it is in a much more dominant position when compared to, say, the PT in Brazil, or the historic PAC in Mexico, or maybe even the LLA in Argentina. So, thanks for listening, thanks for watching. And thanks for all the support in 2024. I know my production schedule slowed to a snail's pace throughout the year, but I appreciate everyone that listens. I think I'm probably going to do some tweaks to the Patreon. I've just been so busy that I haven't been really keeping up with all the everything I promised I'd do with the Patreon, so I'll make some tweaks with that, so it's more reasonable stuff that I think I can actually do every single week. But yeah, next episode we are staying in Latin America, and I'm going to be doing the history of Cuba. Then I will do Iraqi political parties, and then I will do the history of Cyprus. So thanks for listening, thanks for watching. If you want, you can email me at whydocountriesexist@gmail.com for your thoughts, suggestions, or hate mail. Take care. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.